Let's move to the item 7 on the order paper. On this note, I want to call on the Deputy Clerk, Publicity, to read the profile of our guest of honor.
Reverend Dr. Frank Agbo is the president and founder of Kharistar International Academy and Caris Gate Chapel, located in Ho, Ghana. He holds a PhD in educational leadership from the University of Cumberland, USA, an MBA from the University of Maryland, USA, and an MA from Browe State University, USA. Additionally, he earned a BA from the University of Ghana, Legon, and a DBS in accounting from the then Ho Polytechnic, now Ho Technical University. Reverend Dr. Agbo has extensive professional experience both in Ghana and the USA. He has worked as a clinical psychologist in Washington, D.C., providing psychological services and support. He has also served as a trainer for the Maryland Board of Elections, Electoral Commission, where he was involved in training election officials and overseeing election processes. Furthermore, he has worked as a social worker with the Maryland Department of Human Services, focusing on providing social services and support to individuals and families. In Ghana, he was a lecturer at Ho Nursing Training College, where he taught and mentored nursing students. Reverend Dr. Frank Agbo's diverse experiences across education, psychology, and social work reflect his commitment to service and community development. His leadership roles in various organizations highlight his dedication to making a positive impact both locally and internationally. Thank you.
Honorable members, when I hear title like this, it gives me motivation. I say one day I'll also be there. On this note, Doctor, please, you have the podium.
Thanks very much, Honorable Speaker. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share a few things with you as a youth. The theme for discussion is leveraging youth engagement for consolidating the principles of parliamentary democracy. I always ask the question, are we going to sustain this democracy? As Ghanaians, are we going to sustain it? Is it sustainable? Someday to come, are we going back to military rule or dictatorship, as is happening in some countries around us? To sustain the parliamentary democracy, it's important we take some steps. We have to defend it. To be sustainable, it must be defended. And we have to be ready to pay the price to keep this fourth parliament. Because this is the fourth time Ghana is trying to sustain their democracy. In the past, there were a lot of coup d'etats. And the last one was Ronnie's regime. Until we started in 1992, the new or the fourth parliament or democracy. So yes, getting to 32 years ago, we decided as a nation to go back to democracy instead of the military dictatorship or rulership. But how we are behaving as a nation, I always ask the question, is it sustainable? In your heart of hearts, if they should ask you today, are we sure next 10 years to come, 20 years to come, the number of years to come, we're going to sustain this parliamentary democracy? And if we're going to do this, it will depend on the youth. As simple as that. Across the continent of Africa, most nations keep electing old people. The youth keep electing old people to shape the future for them. What an irony. How do we keep electing old people who have no future to shape the future for the youth? So it's important as youth, we take our destiny into our own hands. On the continent of Africa, it's gradually becoming what I call gerontocracy versus democracy. The election of old people to lead us. Old people that some of them, as a matter of fact, just have no future. That either wasted their future or have spent their future. So, as youth as we are, do we elect one of our own to lead us, or we keep electing old people to lead us into a future they don't have? That's the first question I always ask anytime I meet the youth anywhere. But are the youth prepared anyway? Are they ready? Morally, are they ready? With experience, are they ready? Ghanaian youth, are they ready to lead themselves? Are they prepared? Are they ready to sacrifice? So it's important we deliberate on some of these issues as to what we want to do with our democracy. 10 years to come, 20 years to come, 30 years to come, 40 years to come. As a youth, how old will you be in the next 20 years? Add 20 years to your years and see, or your age. How old will you be? Is the youth who are busy on social media, sharing jokes, ready to take their destiny to their own hands? The youth that are not willing to even sacrifice anything, are they ready to take up their future into their own hands? The youth that is so much into entertainment, are they ready to take care of their own future? So it's important we decide what we want to do as a youth. So the question again is leveraging youth engagement for consolidating the principles of parliamentary democracy. What are some of the principles for this parliamentary democracy? 1, separation of powers. For any democracy to thrive or to do well in any part of the world, we must have separation of powers, the 3 arms of government, for each to play its role effectively to sustain any democracy in any part of the world. There should be separation, clear separation of powers. That's why I always recommend that we don't even choose ministers from parliament. Because when ministers become part of the executive, they could not perform their legislative roles well and effectively. So it's important we do clear separation of powers, as is done in advanced countries. Separation of powers is a principle of democracy we must take seriously. Another principle we should take seriously is a representative democracy. In other words, we should represent our constituents or constituencies. We should send qualified people to represent us. Those who are fit for purpose. Those who are qualified. Those who are prepared. And not just because we probably love the person or not. You could love someone, send the person to parliament, but could not do the job. So we must have qualified people to represent us in parliament for this democracy to be sustainable. Accountability. We have to hold our leaders accountable. It's one principle we must take seriously as youth. That when we send someone to parliament, for instance, how many times have you spoken to your member of parliament? How many times have they held any town hall meetings to discuss maybe legislations or the bills they pass in parliament? Until maybe 4 years after, before you see them around. Or briefly you meet them at a funeral or at a wedding ceremony. But do they come around to their constituencies and tell us and account to us as to their stewardship in parliament? So these are issues we should be taking seriously as the youth of Ghana. And also, collective responsibility. That as citizens we have a role to play. We don't just depend strictly on the executive or the three arms of government, parliament or the judiciary, to do everything for us. As citizens, we must also be responsible in our own small ways. As my brother has just begun or started with this, the executive director starts with this youth in parliament. It's a great initiative, where at our level, we try as much as we can to start, practicing democratic processes and also the standing orders. It's in the right direction. So collective responsibility. For democracy to thrive, it should be a collective responsibility. I talk about parliamentary sovereignty. The parliamentary sovereignty, which means that it's an arm of government and it must play its role as a sovereign institution or arm of government. And that's why I mentioned earlier that it's not the right practice or it's not the best practice to choose members of parliament as ministers of state. They become automatic members of the executive, which means their constituencies are denied representation indirectly, invariably, because if a member of parliament is chosen as probably Minister of Agric or Minister of Finance, what happens is that most cases they don't even go to parliament anymore. They are strictly accountable to the executive, the president. So what happens to our MP that we have chosen? So it's not the best practice to choose members of parliament as ministers. That practice must stop somewhere. Because parliament is a sovereign, has its sovereignty, and as an arm of government to play and play their roles effectively. Rule of law. Now, the rule of law is one principle of democracy that we must take seriously in Ghana. Where there is this big man syndrome, there's this big man thing going on in Ghana, that because I'm a member of parliament, I'm immune to the rules and the laws or the constitution of the nation, and that I'm not part of the constitution doesn't affect me anymore. I can choose to do whatever I want to do. No, because I'm the president, I can decide what I want to do. That is not rule of law. The leaders must be responsible and accountable to their citizens. Rule of law. If a government or executive served as a president, when they are out of office, they must account to the people. As we see in America. Now, our president, Donald J. Trump, served for 4 years, from 2016 to 2020. And he did some things that are not in accordance with the law in the Constitution of America. So we got to hold this guy responsible. He must go to court and defend himself for criminal charges. And some are still pending and still ongoing. That is what we must be doing in Ghana. That you don't just serve and go away with all the impunity without accountable or accountability to the nation. This practice must stop. And if it takes to also amend the Constitution, we must do that. So the president one time will stand in the demeanor box and account to the people of this nation. Otherwise, it ceases to be rule of law. We might gradually be drifting to what we call the animal kingdom, where the strongest survives. So rule of law, we must watch it closely. Otherwise, our democracy is not going anywhere. Where a president could do anything he wants to do, member of parliament could do anything he wants to do, a minister of state could just do anything he wants to do without accounting to the citizens. That is not how we sustain parliamentary democracy. To sustain parliamentary democracy, one more time, one of the principles is free and fair elections. We must ensure our elections are free and fair, transparent as much as possible. We don't have electoral commissioners who come changing figures the day they want to announce the leader of this nation as the president. The electoral commissioner must not come changing figures. The election must be as free and fair as it should be. So if citizens have decided to choose someone, the electoral commissioner has a duty to ensure this election is fair and free, devoid of any rigging or stealing or bribing or corruption or any form, in any form. So it's important we ensure free and fair election as one of the fundamental principles of parliamentary democracy. I happen to work in we call it Board of Elections in America, actually. We call it here Electoral Commission. In America, we call it Board of Elections. And I worked at Maryland State Board of Elections as a trainer. I worked there for 3 years. And I was training the election judges as to how to use the instrument. And one of the instruments we use in America is called the e-poll, electronic poll book. We don't use the manual system where they open a book, no. It's an electronic system. You don't even need your voter ID card to vote in America. We have what we call a scanner or scanning machine. It's as tall as this thing here. So once we are voting, it's adding up. It's adding up. So American election could be declared in 5 minutes after the election is closed, because we would have known who won the election. As soon as in 5 minutes we can know, because once you have voted, it's adding up as to who you are voting for. And we just remove what we call the stick. It's like pen drive from the scanner and send it to the Board of Elections. And they tabulate the figures. In 5 minutes, we can know who wins the election. Or we can somehow project because of the scanner. Unlike the manual system we adopt here, and some people will come counting the ballot papers, 1, 2, 3 is a thing of the past in America. It's too crude and it's too manual. That will bring all manner of confusion. So I hope in the future we might use the scanner to tell who wins, and that could speed up the process of declaring who is the winner. We have another one called the ballot marking device in the US. So those people who are not willing to use use the ink or the thumb, they can use the ballot marking device. The disabled people, anybody can use it. So it's printed out and you put it in the scanner, and the scanner adds it, or it counts it immediately to ensure free and fair elections. Independent judiciary. The Attorney General must not, I'm of the view that the Attorney General must not be appointed by the President. The Attorney General must go through a process of earning that position. Because as current case is going, there's this case going on now with Atu Forson's ambulance case. In most cases, the citizens are losing confidence in the judiciary so fast. Why? Because of some of the pronouncement, the tape, and all manner of text messages from Attorney General. That does not sustain parliamentary democracy. Where the Attorney General is trying to do the bidding of the President, that will not help sustain. There could be an escalation, an explosion any day, any time. And these were some of the things that led to the explosion in those days, the upheavals. Because the people were not accountable and they were not doing the right things. So I feel the judiciary must be independent to declare or to pass judgment must not be biased. That is the only way we can sustain this democracy. Transparency and accountability, I spoke about that earlier. And then the bicameralism, the bicameral legislation, which of course someone spoke about it. The executive director spoke about this briefly a few minutes ago, that this parliament, you have the bicameral system, right? Yes, where you have House of Commons and House of what? Lords. So in America, we have what we call the Senate and then the House of Reps, House of Representatives, so Congress. Our current system, we are not sure. We are not sure. That's how come, no wonder they are not able to even amend the Constitution. The Constitution for 32 years now has not been amended. And is gradually becoming almost, I don't know, I don't want to use that word. Maybe the camera is here. Otherwise, I would have to use some word. Our Constitution is one of the worst in the world now. It's not serving its purpose. There are a lot of things in the Constitution that must be amended. For instance, this ex gratia thing. Why should they give ex gratia to say thank you for a parliament of this nature? A parliament or a government that runs down the whole nation, and we are owing more than almost 800 billion from 120 billion, only to go out of parliament and all the MPs to give them 3.6 billion Ghana cedis or 360,000 for saying thank you for running the country into a ditch. That's what, literally they're just saying that for not doing a good job, for doing a bad job for the last 8 years, we want to say thank you. Take 360,000 each. Youth, is that what you want? So the Constitution must be amended. The Constitution must be amended. Otherwise, we pray that one day the youth will not rise up. Because if the youth become wise, I tell you, I'm not sure if we can sustain this parliamentary democracy. So I'm of the view that we should have bicameral system, where at least each region should send a senator. And strictly, we should have a house that amends the Constitution from time to time or comes up with legislation from time to time. Because in most cases, a current system, only the executive will sponsor a bill. The parliament itself is not able to come out with bills as often as. And even if they come out with it and it's debated, the president, the executive could choose not to assign his signature. So gradually, our democracy is becoming something else rather than a democracy. So I'm of the view, because come to think of it, one day, if for some reasons most of the constituencies are not able to send lawyers to parliament to be in the legal committee, or probably they are all defeated, what happens to the Constitution? Who scrutinizes the Constitution? So the current system, we must adopt the US system, or at least the UK system. The bicameral system will help grow our democracy. Why do we have some of these principles to underpin the democracy? 1, for good governance. 2, for accountability. 3, for representation. 4, stability. Protection of rights. And efficient decision making. These are some of the reasons we have the principles of democratic process I mentioned or I discussed earlier. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for attention, but this is what I want to leave with you or take home. The take home is that you cannot sit back and you cannot sit on the fence, especially 2024 election. It's such a crucial, such a crucial election in the history of this country. Because at least I know that about 2 million youth are just walking about aimlessly in town with no jobs. At least that I know. Ladies and gentlemen, at least I know that nurses who graduated 5 years ago, most of them are still at home. At least I know universities churn out at least 150,000 graduates every year, and they are all in town walking about aimlessly. No jobs. That is why this election we can just not sit at home. If you are a youth, you must be concerned. You must tell your colleagues that this election is not like any other election in the history of Ghana, because we are at a turning point as to whether we want to sustain these parliamentary democratic elections or parliamentary democracy or not. Because if anything goes wrong this year, I can assure you, we are not sure, and we cannot tell if we are able to sustain parliamentary democracy in Ghana. Thanks very much for your attention, and looking forward to speaking with you some other time. Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for the insightful words.